Hello everybody, welcome back to my channel. My name is Zara and today I'm going to be giving you some cozy reads to pick up. I don't know about you guys, but more and more over the past year, I would say in particular, I've been wanting to read more cozy reads. There's a lot happening in the world today. Sometimes, even for someone like me who loves grimdark and dark fantasy, I want to read something that's a little less intense and that can just really transport me away from reality. And sometimes grimdark, I think, really hits a bit too close to home, and it's still my favorite genre to read. It's still, the majority of what I want to read going forward, but now and then I want something a bit more cozier and a bit more kind of, a little bit less real and simple. So I have 6 fantasy recommendations, and I also have 3 non-fantasy recommendations. So with that in mind, let's jump in. So the first one that I want to recommend is a book that's coming out in January 2025. I do want to talk about it very briefly because I think you should add this to your pre-order list, and that is Water Moon by Samantha Yambao Soto. This is a book following our main character as she essentially searches for her father. The backdrop is that her and her father own a pawn shop. They essentially trade people's memories and regrets. And it is just such a cool concept. It's such a beautiful, beautiful story about kind of humans coming to terms with the things that they've done. It's just absolutely beautiful. And it's one of those books that I think just makes you kind of take a pause for a second and think about the things maybe you've regretted doing in your own life, and the decisions maybe that you didn't take that you regret not taking. It just explores questions around that, which is stuff that I eat up personally. And as I was reading it, I felt like this kind of warm feeling, because even though it's talking about some pretty heavy stuff, it does it in a way that's very sensitive and emotional, and that makes you kind of consider it, but in a very thoughtful way. There is also a romance element to this book that I wasn't expecting, and as many of you who've been watching my channel will know by now, I don't really like romance fantasy. I don't really like romance in my books in general, and yet the relationship between kind of our 2 main characters was incredibly touching, very, very well written, and was something that I was rooting for, even though I typically hate romance in my books. It was just so beautiful, folks. Like, the writing was stunning. It just kind of makes you feel like you're being cocooned, and it was just a dream to read. The next one I'm going to talk about is Piran by Susanna Clarke. Oh, this book was so comforting, so comforting. Our main character, Piran, is just such a wonderful character, and I think it's him who really makes this world feel so cozy, because in many ways he's got this innocence to him that makes you kind of look at the world in a slightly different way. It's also the setting, the house that Piranesi is in just feels very kind of surreal in a way, and it feels so unique, and it's so unlike any fantasy book or series I've ever read before. And it was just wonderful. It really was. It was really just something quite precious to read this book and be in this world with Piranesi. He's trying to also figure out what's going on as we figure that out too. It's just so comforting. Like, I didn't expect this book to be a comforting read, if you know what I mean. Like, I don't go into books thinking they're going to be comforting, but it just felt like I was being whisked away to this house with Piranesi, and I was trying to figure out what was happening alongside him, and we were on this little journey together. It was just wonderful. So good. How many times am I going to say wonderful in this video, I wonder? Next up, we have a kind of historical fantasy book, and that is A Song for Arbon by Guy Gavriel Kay. Oh, this book is so good. So good. Without a doubt, one of my favourite fantasy books of all time, and probably up there as one of my favourite books of all time. There's something about Guy Gavriel Kay that I just find comforting in general. Like, his books are very intimate, and they make you feel like you know each of these characters in a way that you know your closest friends. Like, you get these people, who they are, why they're doing what they're doing, where they're going, and their kind of inner deepest thoughts. Like, you really get that from pretty much the majority of the characters, and that's what makes his writing so special, because you really feel that kinship with the characters. Even if you don't necessarily identify with them, you still feel like a kinship with them. And it just really enriches the world that we're in, and really creates this sense of, I don't know, just this sense of like, we're on this journey together. They're so beautifully written. All of these books, I have to say, are beautifully written. But there's something about Guy Gavriel Kay. His writing is so lyrical, it's so poetic, and it just feels like you're being transported to, in this case, France, and the world feels like a world that you know and that you're familiar with, even though you've not necessarily been to France before. It's just great. Really, really, really good. Next up, we have an oldie but a goodie, and by an oldie but a goodie, I mean a book that I've been talking about on my channel for quite a while now, and that is The Curse of Shalon by Lois McMaster-Bujold. I think the thing about this book that makes it so comforting is our main character. I think Kaz is a character that I think, at least for me, and I think for a certain type of person, he's just the sort of character that you love to be in his head because he's so real and he's so raw and unfiltered in what he thinks about the world. And I think he's one of those people that is quite rational and doesn't really kind of favour sides or have any political agenda. And I think that's what I find comforting about him is that he's just, you know, if you met someone like Kaz in real life, he would just tell you the truth, the God's honest truth. And there wouldn't be any malicious intent behind it. And that's how I always try to be, without getting too deep into it. I always try to be somebody who can be quite objective. And I never ever want kind of bad intent to be informing my decisions or what I say and what I do. And I think Kaz is exactly like that. And that's what I find comforting is that he's somebody that you know you can trust. Such a great character. Next up, we have a short book, and that is Purple and Black by KJ Parker. Oh, this is so good, this book. It is a story told in epistolary format. We're essentially following two characters as they write letters to each other. And it's basically about two friends who have gained a lot of power over time. And it's about them basically lamenting on kind of rule, what it means to be a leader, and what it means to be a man who is a leader for the good of the people. And it's just, again, it's such you'll see a very common thing amongst all of these books is they're very intimate stories, and we really get insight into the characters' mentality, their mindset, how they think about things, and that's exactly what Purple and Black is like. I read this book in less than a day because it's very, very short. You can read it super quickly, probably in a couple of hours. And it's just one of these books that's always stuck with me because the characters and the thematic work, again, it's stuff that is very real and is very relevant to today's society. It's done in a way that's so approachable, and it's told through characters that are just like normal people. You know, they're obviously smart, but they're like just normal people that you could be talking to at your local coffee place. And that makes it intimate, and the intimacy is what makes it cozy, for me at least. So I think if you want something that's quick, if you want something that's quite philosophical, it's talking a lot about ethics and rule and power and the consequences of that power, then this is a book that you should definitely pick up. It's so good. The next one I'm going to mention is the last fantasy pick, and that is the Earthsea Cycle by Ursula K. Le Guin. I am a massive Ursula K. Le Guin fan now. Like I always was after I read the Earthsea Cycle, but I think as I've read more of her books recently, I'm going to become a super, super fan of hers. Like, I've read 3 books of hers now. I'm kind of factoring in the Earthsea Cycle as one whole world, but I'm planning to read more of her stuff because she's just an absolutely exquisite writer. And again, I think she's able to create worlds that feel very kind of whimsical in a way. And the characters that she writes are just really like beautiful characters that have really compelling stories and that kind of have this search for meaning in life that, again, I just find quite comforting. I'm very aware that my kind of impression of what is comforting might be very different to somebody else's, but obviously I can only go by what I find comforting and recommend you books that I personally find comforting. But I think Earthsea is, you know, they're kind of 4 or 5 disparate stories. I mean, there's 4 stories that form the core kind of Earthsea Cycle, and then I think there's 2 additional stories on top of that. I haven't read those 2 additional stories just yet. I will at some point, but I've read the 4 kind of core stories that go into that. And, you know, somebody like Ged, as an example, such a, like, wonderful character. He's kind of like a very Gandalf character, right? Like, he's quite wise, and, you know, like, if you were in trouble, you'd want to go to someone like Ged because you wouldn't expect him to kind of berate you. He would just kind of sit down with you and be very kind about it and kind of help you try to figure it out. And that's what I like, and that's what I find comforting about this series. Not every single book is following Ged, admittedly, but I think overall the tone and the vibe of this world is just incredibly beautifully written, and it feels like a really wonderful, whimsical fantasy world to be in. It kind of gives me the same feeling as when I read like Lord of the Rings, where I just kind of feel like a sigh of relief. And that's what you want sometimes. All right, let's go into non-SFF recommendations. I only have 3, and funnily enough, they're all written by Japanese authors. Japanese authors are exceptionally good at writing cozy reads. I don't know what it is about the culture. I mean, I have a hypothesis, and maybe I'll talk about that another day. But there's something about their contemporary literature that is incredibly heartwarming. I have quite a few books kind of in that genre of like cozy reads, cozy contemporary reads to read. But over the last kind of year, I've read a few that I think are worth recommending. I may or may not have referenced them at some point or another, but I thought I would again. So the first one is a book that I read a couple of months back, and that is The Nakano Thrift Shop by Hiromi Kawakami. Hiromi Kawakami is quite a famous Japanese author. I've got quite a few of their books on my radar, and this one was really nice because it was very short, and we're essentially following a kind of bunch of characters as they run a thrift shop in Tokyo. And it's just really comforting. It's just about their kind of interactions with customers and the questions that they get asked. And it's about them making certain decisions about their own lives. And it's just really, really beautifully told. Really, really beautifully told. I think this would make an amazing indie movie. Somebody should definitely get the rights for it because it's just so wonderfully told. It's so cozy and comforting and makes you feel like you just want to snuggle down with a blanket and a cup of hot chocolate. So good. The next one is one that I read about a couple of months back, and that is How Do You Live by Genzaburo Yoshino. This is what the latest Studio Ghibli film by Hayao Miyazaki is about. I think it's The Boy and the Heron. It's half based on this book and then also half based on Hayao Miyazaki's life particularly when he was a child. And this book is just wonderful. You know, we're kind of following our main character Copper as he basically asks questions about the world and tries to rationalize different aspects of the world. I've said quite a few times, not necessarily on my channel, but on other channels, about how this book kind of makes me want to write, because I think this is the type of book that I would write. Because it's really about ethics and about how we all function as a society and how everyone has a role to play. There's also some really interesting kind of analogies between kind of like science and society that I really love. As somebody who loves science, that's a dream for me. So it's just really, really lovely. Like a very intimate story. We're really kind of getting into Copper's head as he tries to rationalize different things. It's very relatable to me. I was very similar to Copper when I was a child, and to some extent even today. And so I felt a real kinship to his character, but I also felt a kinship to his uncle, who was the one kind of teaching him the lessons as well. So it's just really nice to get these kind of two perspectives, like this very child-like impression of the world versus this very adult impression of the world, and how those two things contrast in many ways, but also how they're very similar in many ways. Wonderful book that I'm going to reread time and time again. The last one is a book that I think I reviewed maybe a year or two ago, but it's one that I still think about, and that is What You Are Looking For Is in the Library by Michiko Aoyama. This is a book where we follow, I think it's 5 different characters as they go to this library, meet this woman, and she kind of tells them something about their life. Each of these characters are at different points in their life, and they're all kind of experiencing life in different ways. But it's about how like their preconceived notions of what is expected of them shapes then what decisions they make. And that's not always a good thing to do. It's not always good to do what society is expected of you, in my opinion. And I think, especially when you look at a culture like Japanese culture, which is quite rigid in many ways, I don't mean that in a negative way, just to be very clear, but it's got very specific kind of social norms that are very different to, say, Western norms, and they have a very value-driven society, which I think contrasts quite heavily with certain Western cultures. And that's something that I really respect about Japanese culture. And I think that's echoed in quite a lot of Asian cultures in general, not necessarily just East Asian cultures, but also South Asian cultures. So there's quite a few parallels there. So when I was reading this book and I was reading each of these characters, and even though I couldn't necessarily relate to every single one of them, I saw the beauty in each of their stories and how we all have the capacity to change the situations that we're in. It's just whether we have enough desire or drive to do that. There was one character in particular that I really identified with, but I think, again, this is one of those books that you just want to snuggle down with a cup of tea or a cup of hot chocolate with a blanket on. You just kind of go along on the ride with the characters because they're all going through individual struggles, and it's just really beautifully captured, in my opinion. Really, really beautiful book. And I still think about it, and I read this like a year or 2 years ago, so that goes to say something. So that's my last recommendation. I think all of these books are all cozy in their own ways. I think the most kind of common thing is that a lot of these books are very intimate in nature, and they have a very kind of personal feel to them, and that's why they feel very cozy and kind of lovely to read. Let me know down below if you have any cozy recommendations. And by cozy, I don't necessarily mean like books that are positioned as like cozy fantasy. Like, I'm thinking of like the book by Travis Baldree. What is it? Bookshops and Bone Dust. I think that's the second one. Whatever the first one is, like, I don't necessarily mean books like that where like it's very clearly designed to be cozy. I don't think any of these books are cozy fantasy in terms of like the genre or the subgenre of fantasy. It's just that the atmosphere, the tone has a cozy element to it. So I'm specifically looking for books like that, not necessarily the subgenre of cozy fantasy, just kind of books that have that cozy vibe, that intimate vibe, because I'm always looking for those. And we're living in a very difficult time at the moment, I think. I think a lot of people are really struggling with what is happening in the world, and rightly so. I'm included in that, by the way. And so I think reading something that can kind of take you away from that and transport you to not necessarily another world, but to kind of a different perspective, I think is really good, and we should do more of that. So let me know down below if you have any recommendations, and I will definitely check them out. If you like this video, please do give it a thumbs up. Every little helps, and I will see you in my next one, folks. Stay safe, as always, take care, and I will see you soon. Bye.